Thanks, John. Just by way of information, how many of you here have lived in Hungary? Show of hands. And how many of you, keep your hands up, speak Hungarian? And how many of you have lived in Central Eastern Europe? How many in Europe? So a few more? All right, great. That helps us kind of get a sense of who you are. Well, His Excellency, Béla Szombati, was appointed Hungarian ambassador to the United States in 2009. During his distinguished diplomatic career, he has served as head of the Strategic Planning and Information Management Department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as an ambassador to the United Kingdom from 2002 to 2006, and to France, 1994 to 1999, and as well as Deputy Head of State Secretariat for European Integration and Foreign Policy Advisor to the Hungarian President and Head of the Foreign Relations Department of the President's Office in Budapest. Having previously served in Washington as a cultural attaché at the Hungarian Embassy, Ambassador Szombati has held posts at the Hungarian Embassy in Vietnam, as well as in the Foreign Ministry's Department for North America, Asia, Western Europe, and International Security. He joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1980, having completed his higher education at London University and Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest, and is fluent in English and French, as well as some Russian and Spanish. He and his wife, Zsuzsa Mihaly, are parents of 2 sons, and as I mentioned, we're pleased to welcome her to campus as well. The topic for today's discussion, Hungary-U.S. relations. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Szombati.
Well, thank you for that very nice introduction, and thanks to all of you who are present here. I'm very honored, and I feel very sorry for you that you have to skip a basketball game for the sake of this lecture. It is very hard to compete with General Petraeus, of course, but it's even harder probably to compete with a basketball game. So I'm really honored that so many of you have come, and I'm also very pleased to see that so many of you have had experience with Hungary, which of course makes me think about what I should tell you at all. But I'll try to keep what I have to say fairly short, so that you have some time to ask questions, because especially the ones of you who've been to Hungary, but also the ones who haven't, I'm sure that you would have some questions for me. As it has been mentioned in the introduction, that hasn't been mentioned, but I've only been here for a short while. I've been here for 6 months, and before that, in the last 3 years, I was head of strategic planning. Why I am mentioning this is because when I was head of strategic planning, I was also responsible for preparing the first written document on Hungarian external relations strategy. So I would like to speak about Hungarian goals in general in foreign policy and international relations, and this in relationship to our ties with the United States, because the two go together, of course. About our external relations strategy, when we prepared this, when we did this between 2006, late 2006 and early 2008, it took about a year and a half. That is because, as I said, we never had a written document. But we did have a foreign relations strategy, which wasn't exactly put on paper. There was a very brief paper on it, about 2 pages. That was prepared more or less in 1990. That is to say, after the big political changes in Hungary. Because that was a complete reorientation of Hungarian society, of Hungarian economics, and of Hungarian international relations. That goes without saying. But in between 1990 and 2006, what happened was Hungary, and I won't go into details of that, but Hungary became a member first of the Council of Europe, which is a big step towards becoming accepted as a truly democratic country and as a true member of the community of democratic nations. And that was in 1990, actually right after the changes. And then in 1996, if I'm not mistaken, we became members of the OECD. the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, which means that we were accepted as a member of the developed or relatively developed community of nations, economically speaking. And then, 1999, we also joined NATO, which of course was a major step in ensuring Hungarian security, especially in the military, but not only in the military sense of the word. And then, last but not least, in 2004, we also joined the European Union, which, of course, was essential for Hungary and for Hungarians, because we are a European nation, because the European Union for us is a community of shared values, just like NATO, and a transatlantic relationship, a community of shared values. But it's also a community of a shared single market, as you know, which means competition, but which also means a lot of possibilities, tremendous opportunities for exchanges and for modernization of the country, because the European Union, it is about competition, of course, but it is also about solidarity. And that means for a country like Hungary, that is still in many ways in a modernization phase, what it means is structural and cohesion funds, that is to say assistance to help it on the road towards modernization. That is what the European Union was and is for us. Now, what happened, apart from Hungary joining all these organizations, what happened and what called for a new strategy is basically, I mean, lots of things, of course, but two things that I can mention here. One is international relations have gone global. Now, this is not a surprise to you, especially not when we speak about it in 2010. And it wouldn't have been a surprise to you in 2006 either. The difference between the United States and Hungary in this respect is that when we had all those political and economic and social changes in Hungary in 1990, in and around 1990, I mean, we were absorbed and our attention was more or less directed towards these big changes. And we only had time to establish ourselves in these communities that I mentioned. But we had little time to think about what was going on the global scene. And that sort of sunk in much later in Hungary and in Hungarian thinking. So one of the major differences between, say, 1990 and 2006, not that 2006 has any relevance in this respect, except that that was the year when we started to write this external relations strategy. One of the big differences is that the understanding in Hungary that international relations and that the world has really gone global was much stronger than it had been 16 years before. And the other big difference is if you heard when I mentioned it, we had something not really written, it was a foreign relations strategy before. And this one, the one we wrote a few years ago, is an external relations strategy. In other words, the other recognition that sunk in by 2006 is that foreign relations are not anymore about just diplomacy or just classical diplomacy in the field of maybe foreign and maybe some security relations. There's a lot more to it. There is the environment, there is the energy issues, there is the home affairs issues. It's interesting that they should be called, at least in Europe, home affairs. Whereas, I mean, you can see when you look at it closer that it's anything but home affairs now. Of course, part of it is home affairs because you have to take care of it at home. But much of it, much of the insecurity, much of the threats, much of the dangers, much of what has to be done is international, has become international. In other words, it's not just foreign relations anymore. It's external relations, but external relations which are in close which are closely linked to anything and everything that you do at home in your own country. This is true for every country, even the United States, but it's much more true for a much smaller country like Hungary that can do much less in itself, by itself, and that is also comes under much stronger outside influences than the United States would. So those are the two major differences that called for this new strategy. And of course, what we were looking for is what every country is looking for: security, modernization, links with the outside world. There are three major directions that we determined for this Hungarian external relations strategy, and there again, you will not be surprised. The first is Central and Eastern Europe, our immediate neighborhood, if you will. And what are our goals there? It goes without saying again. We are for the stability and security of the Central and Eastern European region. That is extremely important, not just in itself, but also for us. If the wider region is stable and secure, that means Hungary itself is also more stable and more secure. So that is one thing we are striving for in our relationship in the immediate neighborhood. Second is, good neighborly relations. Because this is the basis for everything. It goes without saying. It's not always very easy. We are happy when it is. We are not so happy when it is not. But we always strive to have the best possible relations. Third is economic cooperation. And here what I would like to point out, I'm still speaking about Central and Eastern Europe. The interesting thing is, it is fairly obvious for a country to have the strongest economic and other ties with countries that are in its immediate neighborhood, that are its neighbors, direct or perhaps second neighbors, something like that. So this is obvious, but still, it wasn't the case. It wasn't the case in Central and Eastern Europe. What happened first was, of course, under communist times, you had this, but it was sort of imposed. And everybody was more interested, or would have been more interested, in relations with the rest of the world, with what we called the West at the time. We still do, actually. But now we think we are part of it. That's the difference. So everybody was more interested in this, and therefore, when the opportunities sort of opened up, everybody sort of cast their eyes towards relations, possible relations, and even sometimes the impossible relations with Western Europe and the United States. And there was not enough attention going to the immediate neighborhood. Now, this is what has changed after we became members of all those organizations. And if we look at the last 5 to 10 years, what we see is the natural thing coming back, which is to say, it is with countries in our neighborhood that our relations are growing the fastest. This is true for many types of relations, but it's especially true for economic relations. In other words, these countries take up an increasing share of Hungary's trade relations with the outside world. And some of these countries are, of course, members of the European Union and NATO, like ourselves. Some of them aren't. And one last but very important thing in our relationship with Central and Eastern Europe is, of course, minority rights. I don't want to go into details, but what you know, all of those among you who've been to the place, is that most of these countries are a patchwork of various ethnic groups. And because of our history, we also have strong Hungarian ethnic groups in several. We have ethnic groups in all of our neighbors, but very numerous in some neighboring countries. And therefore, it is also important for us, also because we also have minorities in Hungary, to have as well-established and as wide-ranging minority rights as possible, so that they can retain their identity. Ethnic identity is just as much part of identity as individual identity or religious identity or political identity. It's one of the important things in life. So that is also something that plays in our relations. But the way we look at it, and this is part of our strategy, this is part of our policy in politics, the way we look at it is the best solution, the optimal solution, is to have the best relations at the state-to-state, nation-to-nation level, and also the widest, the broadest possible rights for minorities, because if the two go together, they mutually reinforce the other. Now, the second main direction of our external relations is, of course, the European Union, the European Union. And of course, some people say this has become something that is not any longer external relations. It is becoming internal, because so much is in common now between and among countries belonging to the European Union. As I said, this is a community of values. As I said, this is a single market where we have tough competition, but we also have solidarity. through the structural and cohesion funds, and it is also it has become sort of the main framework of Hungarian policies and Hungarian relations with the outside world, both within the European Union, where we try to solve a lot of our problems in common, and also in relations between the European Union and member countries of the European Union and third countries, the outside world, in the framework of what is commonly called the common foreign and security policy, or the European security and defense policy, which, of course, I have to add, is not always as common as we think it is, or as we would like it to be, but still it tries to put together what these countries have to become more of an international player, in close cooperation, by the way, with the United States. Now, because we think that the European Union is important for us in terms of modernization of Hungary, in terms of the relationship of Hungary with the outside world, in terms of achieving our goals within and outside the country, therefore we think it's the main framework for our action, but we also think that it can become, and it should become, the main framework of action for other countries that want to join the European Union. In other words, an important point in Hungarian foreign policy or external relations policy is that we are for further enlargement of the European Union. Now, the third main direction, and this is what brings us to our relations with the United States, is global action. For a country like Hungary, global action can only be modest. I mean, part of the global action, for example, is for development. And if I give you one statistic, I won't burden you with too many, then you'll see just how difficult it is. I mean, there was a time, it's almost like a fairy tale, there was a time when nations of the world said that the ideal would be to reach every country spending 1% of its GDP on international development. Now, this is really once upon a time. What we have now is, within the European Union, is an ambitious, or a goal that is considered to be even overly ambitious, which is to reach 0.7%. Now, the immediate goal for the more developed nations within the European Union is to reach 0.33%. And the immediate goal for the less developed nations of the European Union, including Hungary, is to reach 0.17%. And where we are right now in Hungary is 0.1%. And that is to tell you two things. One is, I mean, while we are at that, it is very difficult to offer meaningful help to the outside world. By the way, it is also very difficult to build a meaningful European Union, a true, genuine union, when you are at 1% of your GDP, because this is what we spend on the European Union, 1% of the GDP. So that is not really enough to achieve highly ambitious goals. But why I'm saying this, it's to show you two things. One, Hungary is just too small in itself. It's not big enough, it's not strong enough, it's economically not powerful enough, and militarily not powerful enough to change things in the world by itself. But we can do much more than we could do alone, on our own, in cooperation with our partners in the European Union, and also in cooperation with our partners outside of the European Union, and in the first place, it goes without saying, the United States. And then we can do more, not just for international development, but also for international security. Because as I said, one of the recognitions for Hungary was that international security, I mean, what happens in Afghanistan, what happens in the field of terrorism, what happens in the field of climate change, I mean, will affect Hungary, whether we like it or not, and we cannot just act as if we didn't have anything to do about it. That is why Hungary is trying to act in conjunction with its partners and allies to do something on all these issues. I'll come back to this a little later. As I said, for Hungary, the most important relationship is and has to be the European Union, within the European Union, and the most important external relationship, external to the European Union in this sense, is of course the transatlantic relationship, the transatlantic cooperation, and that means primarily the United States, not just the United States, but primarily the United States. As I said, this is another community of values. This is also another community that shares a lot of common interests. I'm not saying that our interests never clash, never conflict, but what I'm saying is our values are basically the same, and our interests are much closer to each other than our interests are with any other player in the world outside of this transatlantic relationship. And therefore, the better we act upon this assumption, and the better our transatlantic cooperation is and remains, the better the chances that we can achieve our goals on both sides of the Atlantic, both the Americans and the Europeans. Now, I've come to the Hungarian-American part of relations. I will not give you an overview of everything that we are doing, everything that we're trying to do here in the United States. That would be long and boring. I would just like to point out a few things. I mentioned international security. There are three areas which I could probably say stand out, where we cooperate very closely with our American partners. One is Afghanistan. Afghanistan is really a pivotal point, a pivotal element in transatlantic relations, just as it is a cornerstone of international security. I mean, what happens in Afghanistan can and will determine the direction the world will take in the next few years. And therefore, it is an extremely important scene of our cooperation. And therefore, Hungary is doing two things. Two important things, not just by Hungarian standards, and extremely important and huge, I think, compared to the country's size and possibilities. One is we are the lead nation in one of the so-called provincial reconstruction teams. And this is important because this is not about military. This is about helping the country reconstruct itself. And this is as important as protecting the people in Afghanistan. This is where we are is one of the northern provinces in Afghanistan, but this also means that we have a military commitment. Because under the circumstances in Afghanistan, if you want to do reconstruction, if you want to do development, you also have to do protection. You also have to do security. And therefore, Hungary has about 300 to 350 troops in Afghanistan, most of them, but not all of them, in this northern area. Some of them cooperating closely with American forces in the south, which is much tougher in military terms. Our Prime Minister announced relatively recently, just about 3 months ago or so, when he was in the United States on a visit, that we would increase the number of those troops by about 200 to 250. So we are going to have about 550, maybe even a little more troops in Afghanistan by the end of this year. That is what we are working on. A second a very important field of cooperation is a very different area. That's the Western Balkans. If I want to characterize Afghanistan, I would say it's important for all of us. It's of primary importance for the United States. Whereas if I want to characterize the Western Balkans, there again I would say it's very important for all of us. It's of primary importance for Hungary, which is immediately adjacent to the region, and it's also important for the United States. Therefore, there is a strong Hungarian presence there. Actually, in terms of numbers and troops, I think it's stronger than the American presence. But what we are looking for is a close cooperation to help these countries maintain their stability or modernize themselves, I mean both at the same time, and also as the best sort of gauge of continuing stability and security and modernization to help them move closer as fast as possible and become members of both NATO and the European Union. So this is what we are trying to achieve in the Western Balkans, and we are trying to maintain maximum American attention in that area, because for historic and cultural and political and many reasons, in some countries of the region, Americans can achieve a lot more than Europeans can. I mean, this is a problem mainly for Europe to solve, but we wouldn't be able to do it without the United States at this stage. And the third area of importance is, of course, Eastern Europe. And here, let me mention the Eastern Partnership, which is a European Union program for helping the countries of Eastern Europe modernize themselves, and also sharing some of our values with them in the hope of speeding up their march and their progress towards a truly democratic state of things. When I say Eastern Europe, just to make sure, we are talking here basically about the ex-Soviet Union countries, minus the Baltic states, of course, which are part of the European Union and NATO, minus also Russia, because Russia is not part of the Eastern Partnership. I don't think Russia wants to be part of Eastern Partnership at this stage, but they can be partners in some projects of Eastern Partnership if they want to, and there is interest on the Russian side. Second field of interest for me as an ambassador here in building relations with the United States is, of course, the economy. America is of course the major economic power in the world, which also means that for any country that wishes to modernize and expand and grow like Hungary does, it is essential to have relations with the United States, which is of course trade, exports and imports, but also, and perhaps even more so, I would say American investment. Why? Because some of the most powerful companies in the world are American, and also because some of the most sophisticated and developed technologies in the world are also American. And therefore we have a lot of interest in expanding these ties, and we've had roughly $10 billion worth of American investment in Hungary in the last 20 years or so, which may not sound that much by American standards, but it's a lot, not just by Hungarian, but by Central European standards. Hungary has, with I think the Czech Republic and Estonia, one of the highest per capita investments in Central Europe, and I think the highest American per capita investment in all of Central and Eastern Europe. So Hungarian-American ties are pretty strong in this field, and we of course are very happy about that. What we're also looking for, and what I also have to work on here is something which is sort of prepare the ground for some further American investment. And what we have to do in the first place in this field right now is to do some explanation. Why? Because Hungary has undergone some very difficult times in the last year and a half. Less so in the last 6 months, more so in the year preceding those last 6 months. Why? Because of a not too responsible economic and budgetary policy that was continued for about, well, let's say at least 7, 8, maybe 10 years in Hungary, which led to the deficit of the government budget sort of running away. At its peak, it was close to 10%. Now you could say, of course, well, it's 10% in the United States as well, and it's 12% in the United Kingdom, and it's yes, but the possibilities, the opportunities of a country like Hungary, which depends a lot more on the international markets, are not exactly the same as the opportunities of the United States or even the United Kingdom. And therefore, what this meant for Hungary is that when the crisis, the global financial and then economic crisis struck, it hit Hungary harder than it hit most countries. This was the bad thing. The good thing was that this forced us to act on the deficit of the budget. And this meant that we brought down the deficit of the budget, and we brought it down to less than 4%, from 10% to less than 4%. Now, I won't go into all the details of what this meant, but this meant cutting government expenditure. This meant huge cuts in people's salaries, especially government employees. This meant huge cuts in people's pensions. And it also meant some structural changes, like raising the age of retirement, also some rearrangement in taxation, roughly the same going to personal income tax or coming in from personal income taxes, but less coming in on taxes on labor and more coming in from taxes on consumption, which is sort of a way of creating a better balance and better conditions for economic growth. And this is exactly what we're hoping for and what we are seeing the first steps towards, which is having redressed the balance of the Hungarian budget. That helps the Hungarian economy, and it also helps bringing investors into Hungary again when growth picks up in the world, because of course it has to pick up first. I mean, in the United States, in Germany, which is our major economic partner, as well as in other countries. And then the third project that I would like to mention here that I'm working on in my capacity as ambassador is something that has to do with the social cohesion of Hungary, because it's not just the politics that is important, it's not just the economy that is important, society is the most important. And we have a tremendous challenge there, which is to integrate the Roma population of Hungary a lot better than we've been able to do in the last 20 years. And I won't give you the full story, that would again take too much time. I will just tell you one thing. One project that I would like to work out as a Hungarian-American cooperation project would be to look at a fairly, many say hugely successful project in the United States called the Harlem Children's Zone, to integrate the Black American population in New York, which has been very successful. And what we are trying to do is look at this project, because there are differences also, but lots of similarities in the situation of the Roma population in Hungary and the situation of the Black American population, especially in Harlem, in New York, 30 years ago. And look at these and see what can be adapted to the Hungarian environment, in big city, urban environment, and then to build a pilot project on that. And that, if that shows that the lessons can be learned and the experience can be repeated, with changes definitely in Hungary, then to do something major in that and to use it as one of the keys to solving the problem of the integration of the Romas. And the last thing I want to mention here, because I couldn't go without mentioning, is that we're having elections in Hungary in less than a month, in the month of April. Now that will change a lot of things. We'll definitely have a new government. It will be a conservative, right-of-center government, whereas the previous governments were left-of-center. So it will change a lot of things. But it will also leave some essential things unchanged. One is the further drive towards modernization will remain unchanged, and therefore I think that the economic policy and the budgetary policy cannot change a lot in Hungary, and it probably will not change a lot in Hungary, so as to be able to remain as receptive to foreign investment and international relations in economy as we've been over the last very many years. So that's one thing that is not very likely to change significantly. And the other thing that is not likely to change significantly is our international relations and our main goals in international relations. There will be some different accents. Some more accents on our immediate relationship with the immediate neighborhood of Hungary, but there will not be a change. I do not expect a change in the importance we attach to our relations with the United States and in the nature of our relations with the United States. So I think some changes, but some things essentially remaining the same. So that is why I'll stop, and I'll be happy if you have a few questions, and I'll try to answer them as best I can. Thanks for your attention.
We don't have a wireless mic, so if you have a question, stand up. Raise your hand first, we'll call on you, and then tell us your name and what you're studying as well. So, any questions, please?
Looking at Greece and their attempts to cut the deficit, I was just wondering how Hungarians in general perceive the conflict and, I guess, the riots in Greece. As you pointed out, you've been able to successfully cut your deficit. I was just wondering how Hungary.
Hungarians don't seem to. Has everyone heard the question? I mean, sorry, do I have to repeat it? Is it okay? It's about Greece and Hungary and how Hungarians look at the riots in Greece. Hungarians in the last 20 years proved to be a not very rioting people to begin with, which is good, actually. Second is, I think the main question is not how they look at events in Greece, but how they look at events in Hungary. They hate it. I mean, who would like cuts in their salaries or their pensions? Or everybody hates it, but it looks like a growing share of the population has come to understand that it's inevitable. And perhaps, even more importantly for politics, it looks like the major political parties have come to understand that it's inevitable. And I want to add here that the cuts that have been made in Hungary were not made by the left-of-center governments that I mentioned, but we've had a sort of more or less a crisis management government for the last year or so. And this is the government that made most of the changes, not all of the changes, but most of the changes. But of course, and there hasn't been very many attacks from the opposition on the government policies. And we don't see, although we are in the middle of the electoral campaign, we don't see a lot of debate going on about economic issues or about the economic policy of the current crisis management government. And that is a good sign, because it means that everybody has understood on the political scene that you cannot change that significantly. So that's the Hungarian part. If you... And I think it works. I mean, the policy works, and the best proof that the policy works is, you may remember that, I don't know how many weeks ago, maybe 6, 8, 10 weeks ago, maybe more, there was a sort of a mini crisis, a financial crisis in Dubai, if you remember that. Lasted about 2 days, no longer than that, maybe 3. And what you saw was, by that time, we were well on our way towards redressing the balance of our budget, and still, lots of analysts and papers they remembered Hungary, and when they wrote about Dubai, they mentioned Hungary. That's stupid, but it's the way things work. Now, when Greece came, nobody mentions Hungary, and that's the good news. No news is good news. They generally say it, but in this case, it really is good news, because it shows that the analysts have now understood that Hungary is no longer in this group of countries. Hungary now is part of the group of countries that have put things right. Now, the way Hungarians look at it, at events in Greece, I don't think they care too much. I mean, they are more absorbed by their own problems. But it's more interesting to see how the Greek look at what happened in Hungary. And of course, I'm not talking about the people who are out in the street protesting against, understandably, against the hardship that they are exposed to. But the interesting is that the Greek Prime Minister comes to Hungary to learn about how we manage to redress the balance. And it's not just now, they already came to us several weeks ago, even before everybody understood the magnitude of the difficulties that Greece has to face. And it wasn't just Greece. Other countries closer to us have also come to see us and ask how we did it, so as to see how much they could use of the Hungarian experience themselves. And it's always better to have such a situation, because Hungarians are, they got to be we got used to being the sort of in the front line of positive changes in Central and Eastern Europe in the 1980s and 1990s. And we really hated being relegated to this group of problem countries. And so we are very happy to come out of the group, and again, to be able to demonstrate that we are doing something right, and in a way that can even set an example from some other countries, not just in the region, but also in the region.
My name is Daniel Allen. I'm studying political science. I believe a lot of thinkers in Russia still consider Hungary to be part of a Russian sphere of influence. So how responsive is Hungary to Russian expansion in comparison to other Eastern European
Okay. To begin with, I wouldn't say that. I mean, the question was about, many thinkers in Russia would still consider Hungary as being part of the Russian sphere of influence, and how responsive is Hungary to Russian expansion. I wouldn't say it. I think that many thinkers in Russia, actually most thinkers in Russia, probably still see the CIS countries as part of the Russian sphere of influence. That is to say, politically and socially, they would look at countries like Belarus and Moldova and Ukraine and the 3 Transcaucasian countries and the 5 Central Asian republics as part of the Russian sphere of influence. They would not look at the Baltic countries and at the Central European countries, the ones I didn't mention, as part of the political or social sphere of influence of Russia. So I think that's a significant distinction there, because this means that they don't. I mean, I don't think Russians have sort of immediate aims concerning these countries. What Russia is understandably still looking for is economic influence. And economic influence, when it means economic relations, when it means exports and imports, even when it means investment, that's okay. Perfectly okay with us. What is not okay is when investment is not transparent. And you don't know who is making the investment, what is the purpose of the investment. Is it an economic type of investment, or is it more like a political type of investment? Because then you watch out. So that is the important thing. We are open to relations with Russia, just like we are open to relations with any country in the world that is up to the sort of minimum standards of international behavior. And Russia certainly is. So we are open to those relations, any type of relations. But of course, we always have to be careful, and I'm not talking about Russia here in particular, I'm talking in general terms. We always have to be careful about relations possibly undermining the security of the country. And one significant aspect, of course, of relations between Hungary and many other countries in the region and Russia is energy. And that is a question of energy security for Hungary. Why? Because if you look at the consumption of energy in Hungary, what is called the so-called primary energy mix, which is the energies you use, I mean, to simplify things, 40 to 45% of that is gas. Now, 85% of that gas, which is 45% of our consumption, that is to say roughly a third of our consumption, comes from Russia. It's imported and it comes from Russia. And it comes basically through one single pipeline that comes through Russia and Ukraine and then Hungary. Now, why is that bad? Because that means that you are exposed to a significant, actually to a huge extent, to one single provider of energy and one single transit route for energy. And if there is a problem with the transit route or with the provider, whether it be of political or technical nature, then you have huge problems, like we did about 3 years ago when there was a quarrel between Gazprom, the Russian supplier, and Ukraine, and all of a sudden gas was cut off. Now we've learned the lesson. Now we have huge storage capacities in Hungary, and we are trying to diversify. And that is the answer. Diversify in many ways. Diversify the energies you use. That is to say, try to use a little less gas, try to use more renewables, try to use more nuclear. That's one way of diversifying. Second way of diversifying is diversify the transit routes. In other words, even if the gas that we get comes from Russia, not all of it should come through the same pipeline. What is the answer? Possibly another pipeline. You can also diversify the sources. And then what comes to your mind is something that diversifies both transit and the source, which is LNG, liquefied natural gas, which then could come either through Poland from the Baltic Sea or through Croatia from the Adriatic Sea. From Croatia it already almost exists, the possibility. From Poland it would have to be worked out. So what we are trying to do is to build so-called interconnectors linking the Central European countries so that we can diversify our imports of gas. We can also diversify what kind of gas we are importing, and the best solution also to diversify the sources of gas. So without, wanting not to import from Russia, we're also looking to be able to import gas from countries like Azerbaijan, and perhaps Egypt, and perhaps Iraq.
I'm Jay, majoring in physics. And when I was there, they were still using the forint. I was curious if there's some kind of a plan for switching to the euro at all, or?
Yeah, well, there is some kind of a plan, but the problem is, the question was whether we have plans to switch from our national currency, the forint, to the euro. I would say our ambition is to do that. Our problem is that we've had plans for the last 8 years at least, maybe more, 10 years. And we already had 3 target dates. And we missed all of those target dates. So now we said to ourselves, when we missed the last one about 3 years ago, we said, okay, first now let's create the conditions. And then let's set the target date. So I cannot tell you what our target date is because we don't have one. But we still want to become part of the Eurozone. Because one of the things that the latest crisis, financial crisis, taught us is that being part of the European Union is already a huge protection. It's a huge protective shield in financial matters. But being part of the Eurozone is even better as a protective shield, actually. So we want to be part of it. We always want to be part of it, not just because of this, but this is also a very strong reason to want to be part of it. But first, let's create the conditions. So what I can tell you is rather what some of the houses that analyze the situation in countries like Hungary and others, what they say. And what they say is, if Hungary keeps on track with the current economic policies, it may become a member of the Eurozone if it wishes to, as early as 2013 or 2014. Which, of course, as you know, if you ask the question, you probably know, becoming a member of the Eurozone first requires 2 years in the sort of antechamber of the Eurozone, which is the European monetary system. So that's 2 years where you have to satisfy all the criteria, comply with all the obligations, and then you can become. So this is very positive about our economic policy, because if they say as early as 2013, what they say basically is we could become part of this monetary system as early as 2011, which is next year. Okay, last question.
My name is Luis, I'm from Brazil, and I'm studying political science. In one of my classes, Professor Jacob, he has written a book about the enlargement of the European Union. And one question that he asks, and I don't know the answer to, is why Eastern European countries or Central European countries, after being under the influence of Soviet Union, being controlled, after that, why they accept so easily to be under the influence of European Union? They didn't.
Good question.
My question.
Absolutely, absolutely. Many Hungarians would ask the same question. The question was, Hungary, with other countries, having been part of the Soviet Empire and being strongly influenced by the Soviet Union, why do we accept so easily to come under the influence of the European Union? And the answer is very simple. We are not under the influence of the European Union. We are part of the European Union because we wanted to be part of the European Union, and that's a very different thing. We never asked to be part of the Soviet Empire. We never asked to be part of Comecon. We never asked to be part of the Warsaw Treaty Organization. We never wanted to join any of these, and we never thought that this in any way helped Hungary on any matter. Whereas we think that being part of the European Union, which we very much wanted to happen, and being part of NATO, which we very much wanted to happen, helps us in many ways. And it's, as I said, it's the community of nations that we share values with, ideas with, where we want to belong, and which can help us achieve our own goals of modernizing our society, of maintaining democratic institutions' stability and social and the society's stability, and all those things. So it's a very different situation. I mean, Brussels is not Moscow. I know that sometimes that is the image. That is the image. But what you should understand is for example, when people say Brussels, I mean, the first question you should always ask, and you should always be on the watch out. The first question you should always ask is, what do you mean? What is Brussels? Because Brussels is several things. I mean, what people usually mean is the European Commission. But the European Commission is not making decisions on lots of issues. On lots of issues, the decisions are made by the European Council. And what is the European Council? The European Council is is a board comprised of the representatives of the 27 governments, the heads of government, heads of state and government. So in other words, there are decisions that the member states have to make. And there are decisions where we decided that we would have a single market, trade issues, lots of other issues where we said, okay, we are sort of declining this decision-making power, and we will send it to Brussels, to the European Commission. But that was also something that we had to think about and that we had to accept or reject. Because what you need is, you had to ratify Hungary belonging to the European Union. It couldn't be just a decision made by the Hungarian government. It needed a vote by Hungarian parliament, and it needed popular support. I'm sorry, I think your time is up. I'll be around for a few minutes. If there is anyone who wants to ask a question, come to me. Thank you.